Meeting of the Economic Development Committee to order. With your assistance, glad to be joined by my colleagues Paul Krikorian and Mitch O'Farrell. We may have one or two other members joining us. And this is our last meeting before we adjourn for the summer break. You want to try this one? It's okay. Oops, not that one. Here you go. Okay, we've got some, let's get the roll, Mr. Clerk. We're here? We're here. We got some multiple agenda items. Yes. Okay, we're going to do general public comment first. Antonio Ramirez. Looks like you're commenting on item 2, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yes.
You may proceed.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. There will never, I'll start with public comments. There will never be a vibrant, fruitful, and robust economic development when you hire these venomous, jealous, nosy, come caca, filthy, uncivilized, and nasty savages, racist, hate-mongering wetbacks, and Chango Latino gang-banging pussies, pigs, and thieves, because they sabotage their clients, customers, and consumers, and because they don't have customer service manners or etiquette, and they flat-out lie, cheat, deceive, and backstab their American employers, eventually causing robbery and theft to the American economy, and the businesses all eventually go belly up. And number one, do not fund these workforce development services because they are monopolized by these wetbacks and gangbangers, and ultimately leaving out and alienating military veterans, our beloved military veterans, and American citizens. That means law-abiding American citizens. We have to deal with this plight every day we go into these workforce centers. We get bullied, attacked, and ostracized by these wetbacks and gangbangers. And I will go ahead and say number 2 and 3. It's a shame that City Attorney Mike Fewer is suing Carl's Jr. and other businesses because they're not giving higher wages to these wetbacks and gangbangers. Why doesn't he fight for the military veterans? And incidentally, these wetbacks and gangbangers are making more money than the Latinos living in their native countries. They are the ones to feel sorry for. I feel sorry for the Latinos in their homeland countries because they make pennies a day. And number 3, 4, and 5, and all the others, I will consolidate them. Look at Reseda Canoga Park. Absolutely disgusting and ugly. Van Owen Street, which goes from Universal City all the way to Woodland Hills. Again, disgusting. Ugly and disgusting. Reseda Canoga Park, disgusting. You've got Reseda Canoga Park, Sherman Way. These neighborhoods are all disgusting, and the council members who don't clean up their communities, they ought to be shot, and they ought to be just downright removed, because that's how you can tell a good council member is how their neighborhoods look. And I'm sorry to say all the Latino neighborhoods are vandalized, graffitied, destroyed. It's their sewage centers, their cesspools, and their landfills. I, as a Latina, am embarrassed to walk in these neighborhoods. And when I look at these neighborhoods, I start to look at who's the council member for these cities, who's the council member for this community, and I've already got you pegged, because these council members are worthless. They're only pandering to these wetbacks and gangbangers and the political status quo, and eventually you're going to be held accountable and culpable. God bless Donald Trump, and God bless America.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, next on multiple items, we've got Yvonne, is it Autry? Come on up, Yvonne. Item 6, 5, 4, 2, and public comment.
Thank you, Councilman Price. Yeah, I'd like to support my colleague, Antonia Ramirez. I'd like to preface my comment and stating that, for the record, I am not anti-Semitic, nor am I against Latin people. However, as an African-American woman, I must again support Antonia in stating that the jobs are I think being given to Latin people in preference even against naturalized or American-born black people. I rarely even see black people working. I rarely even see white people working. All of the jobs are going towards illegal immigrants and those that have taken the time to naturalize or become citizens, and it is excess, and I think it's because of the financial element. Again, a lot of the landlords who are Jewish and that I have in the buildings where I live hire illegal maintenance workers who illegally enter my apartment, sexually harass me, put holes in my clothes. I speak and read and write Spanish and 4 other languages, and they don't know that I understand what they're saying. And I do not have to endure this sexual denigration and sexual exploitation simply because it is financially beneficial, it's more lucrative, or it's more economic.
Please stay on the item, ma'am.
Well, this is all about the opportunities that Americans should have.
General public comment is over. I think she needs to move on to one of the items if she's on multiple items.
Well, no, this is relative to resources, jobs, and as well as economic development and opportunities that should be created for all Americans, not just the immigrants that are benefiting the city.
Specific items that you put cards on. You need to speak
I bet
to
you're
those
Jewish,
items.
aren't you?
Okay, this, please, if
I'm
you could
sure
stay
that
on
you
the
are.
item, ma'am.
Okay,
General
but to be
public comment.
specific, and this is
Which item are you speaking to?
specific. I'm speaking to number 4. Okay, so for this specific property, make sure that you're employing or giving opportunities to all Americans, not just predominantly those who are economically sound. For, like I said, I'm not anti-Semitic, for those of your demographic to employ, making sure they're expanding and making these opportunities available for all that apply.
Again, you're not speaking to the public improvements in the Hollywood redevelopment project area. That's number 4.
No, I didn't see you censure Ms. Ramirez when she was speaking about wetbacks. I didn't hear you say anything, so don't you cut me off.
Ms. Ramirez,
let's come to order.
I didn't hear you. So again, I'm not going to use up the remainder of my 48 seconds, but I didn't hear you interrupt her. So I'm going to speak directly, and I'm not going to digress further. But again, this is in expanding and making this economic diversity and maintaining economic diversity, which is the expansion of job opportunities. This is the focus, and this is why we are here today. Okay, and again, I'm speaking in representation of African American people, women. We are not to be used or exploited sexually. If we have more job opportunities, we can avail ourselves and use these opportunities, so we will not be per this institutionalized white male supremacy or Zionist supremacy in the streets, right, which is a larger demographic of black women represented on Skid Row. We need jobs, again, not just for the immigrants, but for black people and other Americans as well.
Thank you for your comments.
You didn't censure Ms. Ramirez. I don't appreciate that. I didn't call anyone a wetback.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
So she's continuing to disrupt the meeting, Mr. Chair, so that we aren't able to conduct the business of this committee.
Let's make a note of that. Thank you. All right, members, we're going to take items 5, 6, 8, and 9 on consent, unless there's an objection.
No objections.
Okay. Can you call item 4 and item 7? Mr. Clerk, I understand we've got some amendments.
Item number 4 is a motion, Blumenfield O'Farrell, relative to utilizing $2 million from the Reseda Canoga Park redevelopment project area to be utilized by the EWDD to acquire commercial space located at 18050 West Van Owen Street and 6750 North Lindley Avenue in Reseda for use by local nonprofits to provide services to area residents and related matters. And item number 7 is a motion, Blumenfield Rue, relative to utilizing $2.9 million from the Reseda Canoga Park redevelopment project area to leverage non-city funding to reactivate the Madrid Theater in Canoga Park.
Okay, are there any amendments?
Mr. Chair, we have amendments to items 4 and 7. To read those individually.
Yes, please.
For item 4, Council File 141174-S22. First one reads, I therefore move that taxable CRA LA excess bond proceeds available to Council District 3 in an amount not to exceed $2 million from the receipt of Canoga Park redevelopment project area be utilized by the Economic and Workforce Development Department to provide small business assistance through commercial facade improvements, tenant improvements, capital purchases, and/or qualifying loans or grants to the owners or tenants of commercial property located at 18050 West Van Owen Street and 6750 North Lindley Avenue in Reseda to be used by local nonprofit entities to provide services to area residents. Furthermore, I further move that the Economic Workforce Development Department, with the assistance of the CAO, CLA, and any other applicable city department, provide report with recommendations to the CRA-LA Bond Oversight Committee to allocate taxable CRA-LA excess bond proceeds in an amount not to exceed $2 million from the receipt of Canoga Park redevelopment project area to provide small business assistance through commercial facade improvements, tenant improvements, capital purchases, and/or qualifying loans or grants to the owners or tenants of commercial property located at 18050 West Van Owen Street and 6750 North Lindley Avenue in the Reseda for use by local nonprofit entities to provide services to area residents as identified in the bond expenditure agreement and bond spending plan for the Reseda Canoga Park redevelopment project area. In regard to number 7, Council File 14-1174-S25, the action is, I therefore move that tax-exempt and taxable CRA-LA excess bond proceeds available to Council District 3 in an amount not to exceed $2,990,000 from the Reseda Canoga Park redevelopment project area to be utilized to create a small business assistance program that leverages non-city funding to reactivate the Madrid Theater in Canoga Park, along with investment in catalytic commercial development in the surrounding area that support the creation of the Madrid Theater Cultural District as described above in the motion. Further move that the Economic and Workforce Development Department, with the assistance of the CAO, CLA, Department of Cultural Affairs, and any other applicable city department, provide a report with recommendations to the CRA-LA Bond Oversight Committee to allocate tax-exempt and taxable CRA-LA excess bond proceeds in an amount not to exceed $2,990,000 to create a small business assistance program that leverages non-city funding to reactivate the Madrid Theater in Canoga Park, along with investment in catalytic commercial development in the surrounding area that support the creation of the Madrid Theater Cultural District as described above in the motion, and as identified in the bond expenditure agreement and bond spending plan for the Reseda Canoga Park redevelopment project area.
Okay, well, thank you for those amendments. Any comments, members? No. I will move that we approve the amendments, to items 4 and 7 as presented. There are no objections. That will be the order. Okay. Let's hear item 1.
Item number 1 is a joint Workforce Development Board and Economic and Workforce Development Department and City Administrative Officer reports relative to approval of the Youth Source Center operators' request for proposals, funding recommendations, and contracts to provide workforce development services to youth for program year July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018.
Okay, we're going to take some public comments first. Yvonne Michelle. Is it Robert Cimarron? I apologize. 3200 Wilshire. Who's that? Robert?
Robert Gutierrez.
Oh, Robert Gutierrez. I'm sorry. Please come forward. Antonio Ramirez. Ana Aguirre. Melissa Aguilar. If you're here, come on to the table.
Your name's been called. Come up and take a seat. Ramirez.
She spoke. I'm sorry. Okay, just identify yourself. Why don't we start with you?
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Melissa Aguilar from Youth Policy Institute. So I am the Assistant Director for the Northeast San Fernando Valley Youth Source Center and the proposed Youth Source in Pico Union. Over the last 5 years, we have worked with over 1,000 youth, providing case management, academic support, college and career workshops, occupational training, serving as mentors, and placements into post-secondary and employment. We are proud of our work and intentional efforts in targeting youth without high school diplomas and helping them become reconnected academically and make strides to upward mobility. We take our roles as service providers with the utmost pride and responsibility, understanding the transformative power of opportunity. It is with this vision and approaches of being trauma-informed, strengths-based, and youth-centered that we operate our youth centers. Our commitment stands strong to continue this work, and we want to thank you in advance for your support of funding our centers.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Good morning, council members. My name is Robert Gutierrez, and I am the Director of the Archdiocese and Youth Employment Services of Catholic Charities. I might add, we have been providing youth source services for the last, I guess, since 1965, when we were funded by the U.S. Department of Labor to join the War on Poverty. We have contracted with the City of Los Angeles for about 40 years when it was transferred over from the Economic and Youth Opportunities Agency to the local governments. I might add that for the last 12 years, we have been a 4-star performer and have achieved all the performance benchmarks. Is my time up?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
But
okay.
thank you for your comments.
Can I make one final comment?
Well, if I let you, then I'll let everybody else make final comments. We're just trying to keep it tight. Thank you for your comments.
Okay.
Ana Aguirre.
Yes, hello, council members. My name is Ana Aguirre, and I'm the director for the Youth Policy Institute's Youth Source Center, located in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, and the recommended Youth Source Center in the Pico Union area. First, I would like to extend our appreciation for being considered and also recommended to be a Youth Source Center provider. We look forward to expanding and strengthening our work, our partnerships, and leveraging federal funds to serve the youth in our communities. Currently, YPI has more than 150 sites across Los Angeles, saturating communities with services to create a cradle to college and career pipeline with support of over 1,500 staff. Since 2013, YPI has helped bring in over $290 million in federal investments in the Promise Zone. The Youth Source Center in Pico Union area, referred to as Central in the RFP, will be a key component in the LA Promise Zone. YPI is a lead implementation partner in the Promise Zone, and we pride ourselves in being able to align and leverage various resources to benefit youth and families that we serve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Melissa.
I went earlier.
Oh, you've been spoken raised, right? All right. I think that concludes.
No, I signed up.
I'm sorry, what's your name now? Pardon?
Corinne Sanchez. I signed up in Common Avocado.
Okay, I don't.
I gave it to the gentleman.
Okay, Amano? Yes, that's correct.
Avocado.
That's correct. Come to the table.
You lost us.
Okay. Oh, all right. Yes. Ms.
Okay, my
Sanchez?
name is,
Is there another part of it?
What's the name?
Simon Lopez.
I don't see a Simon Lopez. We're still checking that. We found? Oh, okay, you're here. Okay, Ms. Sanchez?
yes, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Corinne Sanchez. I thank the Honorable Committee, Kern Price, Chairman, Mr. Seals is not here, Mr. Harris Dawson, Paul Krikorian, and Mitch O'Farrell. My name is Corinne Sanchez. I'm CEO of El Proyecto del Barrio in the San Fernando Valley, which has been there for 46 years. We've been delivering youth and adult services for that period, and recently 17 years in the South San Fernando Valley. We did appeal the denial to discontinue our funding. Our appeal was denied by the appeals board. That is the issue I bring today to the committee to address. I feel strongly that you have given up your right to hear the matters of the appeals as council reps and also as the council as a whole. and I understand this was agreed to through the Workforce Development LEO agreement. So I'm asking that you reconsider as a committee amending that agreement so that you do hear our matters.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. My name is Jaimenat. I work also for El Proyecto del Barrio Youth Program. We've been in the system over 20 years, and we're one of the top performers the last 17 years. We have a 4-star performer, which contribute the city of LA to be recognized as nationwide one of the top youth programs. So what our concern is, we have been in the system for many years now, we're defunded. So I felt like we are happy to get new blood in the system, but you shouldn't get rid of the old people who contribute to the system, a great outcome. And we've been exceeding 17 years DOL performance, and that is a big concern for our community. And we just have to let go our 8,000 customers for our community. So that is very, very serious issue for our community and for our programs.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Simon Lopez.
Thank you so much for allowing us to speak in front of you. My name is Simon Lopez. I'm the Vice President of Workforce and Career Development for Goodwill of Southern California. We are one of the recommended providers for the South Valley area. We are 100 years old. We've been serving youth and families out of our Valley campus for 58 years. Last year we served over 8,000 youth, several hundred of those in the Valley area. More importantly, the future moving forward. We're one of the apprenticeship intermediaries. We're a manufacturing intermediary, and we have stores throughout the Valley. All that means jobs and opportunities for the youth we serve. And actually, most importantly, is the fact that Goodwill serves youth and families with the most barriers to employment. Of the hundreds of youth that we served last year, they're almost exclusively single parents, parenting youth, disconnected youth, probation youth, and those are exactly the youth that we're supposed to serve. So we welcome the opportunity to provide those services in the Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for comments. Anna, did you speak? Anna Guire? Okay. Okay, great. That concludes our comment, unless, yes.
Yeah, it's real work.
What was your name?
Peter Stepp,
Okay, I'm sorry. Peter, come on up.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Peter Stemp, AYE Catholic Charities. I'd like to echo the concerns that El Proyecto del Barrio mentioned as well. We have 50 years of service to the city of Los Angeles. More importantly, we're a consistent 9 years in a row, 4-star performer in the central region. We really ask you to take a look at the RFP process because we're the only ones that have that type of performance in the central region for WIOA services. You guys have been asked to approve an RFP process and recommendations that are asking you to have providers that don't have the same level of performance. That's concerning to us because we've been delivering. We'd ask you to take that into consideration for the betterment of your constituents. That's something that we're deeply concerned about. We have a history of delivering performance, and we've brought a ton of resource to the community. We'd ask you to take a look at a process that has asked you not to continue funding an organization that has the best performance in the region. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other speakers whose name I did not call? If you filled out a card? All right, that's going to conclude our public comment. Let's ask the department to come up to the table. We know how important the Youth Source Center program is in our community. I know there's been a rigorous process. Some folks aren't pleased with the process, and if you could address some of the concerns that have been raised and the challenges, I think that would be helpful as a part of your report, please. Thank you.
Robert Science, EWDD.
We'll start it off with addressing the concerns, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague at the CAO's office for the report itself. So 2 things of note. We do value very, very strongly AYE and El Proyecto. UCLA was also another long-term provider that was not successful in one of the sites. I do want to stress that they are still part of the system. They were successful in another site. So they will be as a part of our
Which provider are you speaking of?
All 3 of them.
All 3?
AYE, UCLA, and El Proyecto will be a provider in the system. So they lost on one site. They did win on another site. In addition to that, they will be receiving upwards of $800,000+ for summer youth services as well. So they're going to be a provider of our summer youth piece. So we did conduct an RFP that really did try to be open and competitive and meet the needs of our constituency. That was very specific to the hardest to serve young people, the disconnected youth in our city. Our criteria in terms of who we wanted as providers did take in consideration their experience. So their demonstrated experience was a part of the RFP process. That was about 40 points, or was 40 points. 50% of the points was on program design. And the program design had heavy, heavy emphasis on partnerships, on integration of other resources, and on employment.
Now, in partnerships, meaning their relations with other organizations
With other
to deliver
organizations.
services?
Right,
or?
right. And both from the Youth Source Center and the Work Source Center systems, we've really have set ourselves up to be a coordinator of the various resources that a young person or an adult will need to get back into the workforce system. So not only that and it's a different system when they talk about JTPA or the old line workforce system where we had standalone agencies trying to do all services for all the clients. So the program design heavily emphasized that partnership and that integration moving forward. We're very proud of the system that we're presenting in front of you, which includes these 3 agencies as well as an additional 11 agencies. 2 of those agencies are city staff run in Boyle Heights and in Watts, but we do have a very large partnership that I think really talks about the breadth of the city, including Brotherhood Crusade and CRCD in the south. So with that, I'll turn it over to Safia for the CAO report.
Good afternoon. Shafia Mir from the CAO's office. So I'll just run through what the CAO report that's before you presents and recommends. And we do have a technical amendment because at the time of the CAO report, one of the service areas was the subject of an appeal of the RFP, and it was before the Workforce Development Board on Friday. And subsequently, the Workforce Development Board sustained EWDD's recommendation for the provider in that service area. So I'll just run through that and state what the technical amendment is. So before you, the CAO report recommends approval of EWDD's request for proposals results and authority to contract with Youth Source Center operators for the 17-18 program year. EWDD received 24 proposals for 14 geographic service areas, and the list of contractors that's recommended for approval by EWDD is in attachment 1 to the CAO report. In addition, EWDD is seeking to establish a replacement operator list, which consists of all organizations receiving a score of 70 or higher in the RFP, regardless of whether they were selected to contract. In case one of the 14 contract operators needs to be replaced, the organizations included in the replacement operator list would be eligible to operate the Youth Source Center in those geographic service areas. EWDD also requests approval of the allocation of funds for its subsidized youth work experience program, which includes the Summer Youth Employment Program, included in attachment 3 to the CAO report. And as I stated, as of the date of the CAO report, June 22nd, the operator recommendation for the harbor service area was the subject of an appeal before the Workforce Development Board Appeal Board. And as the department can clarify, the process for the appeal is something that's included in the Workforce Development Board local elected officials agreement, which includes the local elected officials are the council and the mayor. So it's laid out in that agreement. The CAO reports recommends approval only for the 13 that were confirmed at the time of the report. So subsequently, on June 24th, the Appeal Board sustained EWDD's recommendation to award operation of the Harbor Service Area Youth Source Center to Pacific Gateway / City of Long Beach. And the CAO recommends an amendment to our report, which is a technical correction, to add EWDD's authority to negotiate and execute the agreement with City of Long Beach Pacific Gateway for the Harbor Service Area. The source of funding for the Youth Source Centers is primarily the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act federal grant, WIOA, which has been included, the funding has been included as of right now in the 17-18 Workforce Development Board annual plan, which received council approval last week on June 21st. EWDD anticipates funding each of the 14 Youth Source Centers for $1,009,000 per year for a total of $14.1 million. The contract services would begin July 1st through June 30th, July 1st of 2017 through June 30th of 2018. And that's my presentation. We can take questions
Chair.
at this point.
Thank you. Greg Irish, Executive Director to the Board, the Workforce Development Board. 1 out of 6 young people in the city of LA are disconnected from school to work. That's 68,000 young folks. This system intends to address that. It is designed to address that. Today, we've got winners and losers, but I got to admit that all of the previous providers were exceptional in terms of delivering services. Unfortunately, every 5 years, we have to go through a procurement process. We redesign the system based on the new legislation, and you have to compete for this money based on a redesigned system. So previously, we had a system of centers, 13 centers. We were at the expiration period of a 5-year procurement, which is required by the federal government to reprocure. We reprocured a new system under a new design, under a new model. So you had competitors, external competitors, and you're required to make sure that it's an equal playing field for everyone to compete. Before you is a recommendation of 14 centers. So we're increasing 1 center in South Los Angeles based on demographics. We're looking at where these 68,000 young folks who are disconnected but from school and work, where they reside, how we can deliver the best services. You've heard from some of our previous providers. Only, well, the 3 that have appealed, and there were 3 appeals, but 2 of the appellants are still in the system. They lost centers to some other folks who are also in part of our system. Maybe they're in our adult system, et cetera. So we're not really, in terms of, I think we only added one new contractor externally, which shows you that we've built a system that's phenomenal with these service providers. So it's unfortunate that some weren't able to retain 2 centers and have 1 center, but the process, which Robert can speak to, because the board only goes with sitting down, looking at what the scores are, and determining whether an appeal is appropriate. Now, as to the process, by federal law, we have to have an agreement that exists between the council, the mayor, and the board with oversight of these funds. That process has existed. We've amended that process to actually reflect the new legislation, but it's existed for 15 years. So if anyone tells you that I've been denied due process, some of these same appellants went through this 4 years ago for the adult system. And apparently that appellant process, or the process of appeals, was sufficient then and gave due process. Sitting on the appeals board is the mayor or his representative, your representative, sir, from your committee, the head of the Workforce Development Board, the head of the Youth Council of the Workforce Development Board, and the department head. Their appeals, and the reason why you did it that way is because you'd have a long, arduous process of appeal to each body when each body must agree by federal law through consensus. So the decision made there is the final. Then you determine and give the authority from the to execute these contracts, as well as to allocate the funds, which you did in the annual plan. Again, there are some folks who lost centers. It is unfortunate because I think they're winners, but we didn't have enough money. I was in Sacramento yesterday. We were anticipating cuts from the federal government and under this new administration. And I'm sad to say we're still battling, but I'm anticipating, as of yesterday, another cut in funding of $1.3 million to the youth program. We are fighting those cuts. I'll have an update, Robert and I, within the next 2 weeks, but it's worse than we thought in terms of what we can anticipate from Washington. We're trying to do the best we can. We're hoping you can as well. These providers are exceptional, all of them, and we ask for your approval.
So what cuts are you contemplating, or
I'm looking
are you
at-
fearing that's going to
I'm
occur
looking at
next year?
No, within this system, there may be some more cuts coming down, in which case we'd have to come back to you at some later time. There's always a provision within those contracts that allows us to adjust, of course, with your permission and your consent, the boards, the Workforce Development Board, and the mayor. We prepared the plan with estimates we received from the state. We have prepared these reports with estimates. The state is now crunching numbers, unfortunately, to reflect what's happening in Washington. It's at a late time when service delivery must begin July 1st, and they'll make adjustments as we go on.
Okay, good. We've been joined by our colleague, Councilman Marquise Harris Dawson. Members, do you have any questions this time? We know a lot of hard work has gone into this process. Mr. Englander?
I don't have any questions. You do.
Mr. Englander?
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Irish, you kind of cleared up a little bit of the history, I think, of this process. But I think all three of you will remember, as I do, there was a time not too many years ago where I think it was this very process that led to some engagement by the council when there were appeals, and there was, I think, a decision made that that our youth would be better served by sort of depoliticizing this process and by following a more neutral analysis than would be had if council members lobbied for their favorite providers. So I'm pleased to hear that I was one of those, I think, that had that concern. And I'm pleased to hear that we're going through this process and that there is an appeal process independent of this body,
yes.
Although we participate.
Yes.
And this is the result that has gone through that winnowing. But I do have a few, kind of questions about the ranking and the point distribution. Probably too late. Well, definitely too late for consideration here, but I just want to hear the thinking on it for our future RFPs. Number one, a few of the appellants mentioned that they were long-standing participants in the program, and yet, and had good results, and yet were not the prevailing bidder. And I was interested in that because when I saw the point breakdown, it seemed to me that the point breakdown overemphasizes incumbent advantages. 40% of the points are given based on experience in providing these services, not services similar to these, these services, which means that anyone who's an incumbent walks into this with an advantage for at least 40% of the points. Am I reading that right?
You're correct in terms of delivery of workforce development services to youth. The disparity comes when you have an external factor or an external applicant or bidder bidding, and then you have the internal, the ones that already exist, that they want our performance metrics to be used totally to gauge whether they should get points. The problem is we as a city, the city council, the mayor, and the board have imposed additional standards above and beyond the federal requirements. So if you're an external party and we would actually impose that in the process, there's no way that the federal government would view that as a fair process. So what the department did was it used performance metrics that are stated within the federal legislation, not the enhanced ones that we require, because we have the best system in the country because we impose additional standards that makes it a level playing field in terms of who goes into this process and who has a chance for success. And maybe you can address that.
Yes, we did take great pains for it to be open and competitive. The history of the workforce dollars was that we didn't have to go through an open competitive process. It was a certification process. So it was the same providers competing against themselves. So when we did this RFP in particular, we opened the system to every provider that did workforce development services. We did not use our internal rankings as a way to give points. We did that on a pass-fail. And then we asked those that did external to our system to provide verification that they provided those type of services. It was really in the RFP where each provider had to state what their services, their verified services were being provided. So that allowed everyone to actually talk about what they do and how they did it and where they did it. And that's what the scorers looked at.
Okay. All right. And then conversely, the cost effectiveness category is only entitled to 10% of the points. And especially in an environment of diminishing resources where we're facing additional cuts, the concern I have with that is you might have a real first-rate provider of services who spends lavishly and serves many fewer people with the same amount of money. Right. And to me, cost effectiveness, if we're going to have anything based on performance metrics, it's how many people did you serve well? Right. It shouldn't be just what's your program design.
Yes.
It should be how many people came in here and got excellent service at the same amount of money. So do we have, for future years, do we have the ability to jigger these numbers, or is this dictated by the
No, it's part of our program design. That's under our purview.
Okay.
This year we did 10 points on the cost effectiveness, and we looked at 3 factors. One of them was leveraged resources. So an agency that's able to bring additional dollars to the system and to the young people got a higher score point. The other one was facility and other costs. Those agencies that had lower and more limited facility and other costs was the other one, and then direct program participant costs. And the more you gave directly to the students was a higher point range.
Yeah, if I were writing the RFP personally, I think I would give more points to cost effectiveness than 10%. I just don't think that's enough emphasis on return on investment.
Right.
And by the way, these are sort of just comments because I'm going to support the
good suggestions when we go out again.
And then the last thing was, we have a strong interest on spreading these benefits across the community to as diverse a pool of providers as we can. And I assume that was the reason why providers were limited to only submitting 2 applications.
Yes, sir.
But what I'm thinking is that similar to, this is a rough analogy, but we have a bidding process for our waste hauling franchises, and we have a cap on market share. We don't have a cap on the number of applications that they can submit. So if one of these providers, maybe they're the most exceptional provider in the nation, I would think that we would want to have them apply for every single part of the city, and then if we want to have, limited market share, we force them to choose the 2 that they win instead of only having them apply twice. Right. Because, otherwise we may not be creating sufficient competition. We may not be considering the best applicants for all of the possible connections they may make in the city.
That's a great suggestion. We hadn't looked at it that way. But also, just to clarify, we did not limit them if they wanted to be a subcontractor. So I know a number of agencies were also a subcontractor in others' proposals.
Yeah, but you're not evaluating them.
No.
You're evaluating the contract.
Overall,
so, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I support the recommendations, Mr. Chair.
Great. Any other comments, members? Okay, we will, did we get an amendment? Did we receive the amendment?
Yeah, we have, basically the technical amendment is simply, the recommendations right now in the CO report are only recommending approval for the program operators for which is number 2A. 2A recommends approval for only 13 of the service areas, whereas CO recommends adding an amendment to add a recommendation to negotiate and execute agreement with the program operator of the harbor service area as listed in attachment 1. And that one was just what we're adding. I can clarify that with the city clerk.
Okay, so without objection, we will approve the CAO report as amended. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work on this. Item 2, Mr. Clerk.
Item number 2 is the Chief Legislative Analyst Report. relative to alignment of the city's living wage ordinance with the city minimum wage. This item was continued from the meeting of June 13th, 2017.
All right, let's get staff at the table, please. All right, are you expecting anyone else, or is it just you?
I'm waiting for John Wickham, too.
Oh, John's going to join us? All right. Yeah, he was. Can you read that item for us, Mr. Clerk? Here he goes.
Here we go.
Just in time.
And, we'll start. So, good afternoon, council members. My name is Steve Lee with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst, and I'm joined by John Wickham from my office. Our office has prepared a report for your consideration today concerning the alignment of the city's living wage policies with the citywide minimum wage. During the last amendment of the city's living wage ordinance in 2016, it came to the attention of city staff that by July 1, 2017, the city's minimum wage will surpass the wage rates of the city's living wage. Allowing for the minimum wage to surpass the living wage creates confusion amongst employers and employees with regard to wages that are earned and complicates administration of the program by the Bureau of Contract Administration. With the establishment of the city's minimum wage, a discrepancy was created between the wage rates under the living wage ordinance and those in the minimum wage ordinance. Currently, the rates of the living wage ordinance start at a different rate than the minimum wage ordinance, anticipates annual increases at a different rate, and applies to employees that are not covered by the minimum wage ordinance. Due to distinctions between the policies of the living wage and the minimum wage, employers have become confused as to wages owed to their employees. The stipulations of the living wage ordinance apply to contractors who do business with the city and applies to their respective employees. However, due to wage discrepancies between the living wage and the minimum wage, employees of city contractors within the geographic boundaries of the city will be paid a different wage relative to their peer employees who are outside of the boundaries of the city. This discrepancy in wages becomes apparent in July 1, 2017, where employees of city contractors and subcontractors outside of the geographic boundaries would be subject to the hourly rate of $11.48 with a health benefit of $1.25, which is a lower wage earned than their peer employees within the city, who will be paid an hourly rate of $12. These wage rate discrepancies complicate the enforcement activities by BCA, which will be required to track and investigate deviations in these wages.
John Wickham, CLA. In our report, we recommended aligning the living wage rate with the minimum wage rate, and then making some adjustments to the health benefit in order to offset some of the impacts on businesses. Subsequent to our report, the motion that's included in item number 3 introduced a number of changes to the suggests a number of changes to the LAWA minimum wage and other elements of the minimum wage or the living wage laws in the city. And as a result of that motion, some questions were raised about this report, this living wage report, as to what rate of wage would be appropriate. Why wouldn't the living wage be actually higher than the minimum wage? Was a question that was asked. And so that's entirely a policy question for the council to ask. I wanted to put that forward to you so that you knew that there are options here. In addition, the motion that's on item 3 has some elements, some other adjustments to the way the health benefit is calculated, and has some adjustments to the language regarding collective bargaining agreements. And so if it is the council's desire to align all of the wage rate systems that we have, it may be appropriate to align the living wage to the other elements of the LAWA living wage that are coming up in the other motion. So basically, subsequent to our report, there were some other factors that came into play from a policy perspective. And so I put that
I just put that on the table for your consideration and your discussion.
Okay. Since items 2 and 3 are related, why don't we take them both up at the same time? Mr. Clerk, can you read item 3 for us, please?
Item number 3 is a motion Martinez, Price, Wesson, Bonin, Cedillo, Harris, Dawson, relative to amending the living wage and service worker retention ordinances to update living wage rates and benefits for benefits policies and related matters.
Okay, so any discussion, members, about this proposed recommendation? Yeah. Let me just ask you to clarify the recommendation in the council file 15-0187. Do you have that document, that page in front of you?
So, Steve, why don't you, our CLA recommendation
just walk us through that?
Yeah, is to align the wage, the living wage, with the minimum wage. As Steve indicated, the minimum wage, effective July 1st, will be higher than the living wage. The living wage is set by ordinance, and there's a rate schedule for the next few years that's already been approved by council. That schedule is lower than the city minimum wage. And so our initial recommendation was to increase the living wage so it was consistent with the minimum wage of $12 an hour beginning July 1st, 2017, and equivalent to the minimum wage every year thereafter. Our recommendation also included adjusting the health benefit. The health benefit under the living wage ordinance is a fixed $1.25, and next year in 2018, the $1.25, and basically what happens is most employers use that as a cash payment to employees, so effectively increases the wage of the employee. So next year when the minimum wage goes up again, the minimum wage will be higher than the living wage plus the health benefit. So at that point, it made sense to remove the health benefit as an additional amount, because basically every employee is already going to be making more than the living wage plus the health benefit. So that was our initial recommendation, was to align the living wage with the minimum wage and adjust the health benefit in a particular way.
I know that was a concern not only of the CAO's office, but also labor unions expressed that same concern. I know there was a lot of input from stakeholders on this solution. Members, any comments? Clear as mud? Yes.
Sorry. Thank you, John, and thanks for your patience, because I think I'm one of those that's a little slow on the uptake on this. And so I'm going to kind of walk through and help me to make sure I'm understanding this right. So the living wage ordinance was enacted over a decade ago, I think, at a time when the state minimum wage was substantially below poverty rates even in the city of Los Angeles. And the idea was, if the city's going to contract, we're going to ensure that our contractors pay a wage appropriate to the city of Los Angeles.
Yes.
That's why it's called a living wage. So that was one statute that we passed, one ordinance that we passed. Then there was a separate ordinance passed specific to the airport-related hotels and other services that were directly connected in some way to the airport. That was on the theory that the airport provided benefits to those businesses, and those benefits should be shared with their employees. So far?
Yes.
So good. Now, more recently, we then passed a broader citywide minimum wage specific to hotel workers that was separate from each of those previous ordinances. And then we passed the citywide minimum wage ordinance that applied to all workers that weren't otherwise covered by those previous three.
Exactly.
Okay? Now, at the time that we passed the minimum wage ordinance, there was a lot of discussion in council about trying to integrate these ordinances in a way that they would not conflict and create the very confusion that you're describing today. So this is the first step in that process, I gather.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, I think the part about adjusting the living wage ordinance in a way that will be consonant with our minimum wage makes sense to me. I just want to make sure that I'm clear in understanding that that change to the living wage ordinance does not change the underlying minimum wage ordinance or the employees that are currently getting minimum wage under the minimum wage ordinance. There's no change for them or their employers.
No.
So this is only specific to our contractors, employees, and others that would have to pay the living wage.
Exactly.
Right. And they would remain $2 above the minimum?
What was that?
Well, that's for airport, and that was going to be my next question, actually, because on the airport one, what's before us is a structured increase to provide a salary or a wage $2 higher than the minimum wage ordinance.
That is the motion, yeah. On item 3.
Okay. So is there, that's simply because that's what was moved. There's no, I mean, that's a policy decision for us to make as to whether or not there's any justification for a specific subset of employees who are employed by a specific subset of employers to be paid $2 more than every single other minimum wage employee in the city.
Yeah. So currently, the airport living wage is higher than, and I think I'm going to need some help. I don't know if the city attorney or BCA might be better able to answer this question. In the scope of things, the living wage is going to be the lowest rate, and then the minimum wage, and then I believe the LAWA living wage, and then the hotel living wage. So they're all 4 different rates from the lowest to the highest. And so the question is, if you're going to align the LAWA living wage, do you bring it down to the minimum wage, the citywide minimum wage, or do you keep it at some rate higher? Past policy of the council has been that the LAWA living wage should be higher than the living wage.
But why do you need to do either? If it's currently above the minimum wage, the minimum wage is rising, why would you need to lower this to conform to the minimum wage? Just wait until the minimum wage catches up like we are doing with everything else.
I really need BCA to help with that question. I believe the LAWA living wage has an escalation factor in it that they would never get to each other.
Okay.
Okay, we've been joined by 2 other subject matter experts. Identify yourself and chime in, please.
Good afternoon. John Raymer, Bureau of Contract Administration.
Good afternoon. Danya Manasian, Deputy City Attorney.
Okay.
So I guess to summarize the question, why is there a $2 premium being proposed for airport-related minimum wage or living wage compared to every other employee?
Well, there is a delta that exists at the airport. The city, put through an amendment to the living wage ordinance to address conditions at LAWA that were somewhat different from the rest of the city as it relates to what the workers were exposed to from a health standpoint. That's why the health care, allowance went up. And also to ensure, given the security concerns at the airport and wanting to preserve the continuity of work, that there was a wage in place that did not lean toward a high turnover. I don't know that there was ever discussion to eliminate the living wage when the minimum wage went in place. There definitely was a discussion to increase the minimum wage given how low it was. When the direction were put in place to reconcile the living wage with the minimum wage, the concern was that the council-controlled living wage was going to be eclipsed by the escalators in the minimum wage that were baked in to reach $21 an hour. So this was an attempt to make sure that those that were under the living wage contractually did not get paid less than what the minimum wage was.
I get that, but that's not exactly my question. Of course it should escalate along with the escalation of the minimum wage. But why should there be a built-in margin to distinguish these employees from every other employee in the city? Because when that airport living wage was originally enacted, The point was, again, it was at the time when we were doing, or it was after the other living wage ordinances, when the state minimum wage was all the protection that people had, and it was ludicrously low by Los Angeles standards. Well, a year ago, this council stepped up and led the state of California and led America by dramatically increasing our minimum wage so that we wouldn't be in that situation again. And this council debated it at extraordinary length over a long period of time, and we concluded what the minimum standard for a wage for an employer in the city of Los Angeles should be. And now, a year later, and I may just be missing something, and I hope I am so it can be easily clarified, but a year later we're saying, yeah, that's true, but if you work at the airport, you get $2 in addition to that. $2 more at the airport than you would get if you lived or worked on the other side of the 405. And I'm just not understanding where that's coming from. As the minimum wage rises, clearly the airport wages should rise too. But that delta, I don't see any policy justification for maintaining that delta forever. A $2 delta. I'm just not getting it, I guess.
Yeah,
So
looking closer at the documents that are in front of us, it is the policy recommendation in the motion in item 3 that there be that premium for the LAWA wage.
Okay.
In looking at Steve gave me the table showing the rate differences over time, and actually in 2018 the minimum wage will be $13.25, and the LAWA living wage would be $12.41. So actually the LAWA living wage does trail the city minimum wage. So next year it would have to be brought up in order to be at least equivalent. Now again, the motion suggests that there should be a premium of the $2 above, and again, that's entirely a policy question for the council.
yeah, and I guess that'll be a discussion to be had in council, but my recollection of the discussion that we had when we were talking about increasing the minimum wage was that the idea would be, as that went up, a rising tide would lift all boats, that eventually we would have equalization of the different minimum wage ordinances because the minimum wage was going up. It was not the goal that I heard anyone express that as that goes up, we should maintain the disparity among classes of employees by continuing to have separate wages for separate. In fact, I think one of the slogans was one wage, one city or something. The idea was that as that goes up, everybody's going to benefit from it. Yeah. But not to have some group benefiting more than other groups. And, we had the same discussion with regard to the hotel minimum wage when I was really struggling to understand why an employee, in one business would be getting so much more than an employee doing the exact same work in, say, a restaurant that wasn't in a hotel. So a person who's bussing tables or washing dishes in a restaurant right next door to a hotel would be getting $5 an hour less than the person bussing tables and washing dishes in the hotel restaurant. And that didn't make sense. It didn't seem fair to me, to the majority of our working poor in this city, that they would be deprived of, that they would be forced to work for a much lower rate because they weren't part of a chosen industry that we selected for no apparent reason. And by the same token, I'm just not getting why a minimum wage worker doing the exact same work in the San Fernando Valley is valued differently than a minimum wage worker who works on Century Boulevard. I don't get it. So if maybe somebody can clarify that for me, but I'm not understanding.
Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you elaborate on how consumer price index and collective bargaining factors into this conversation as it relates to LAWA?
Well, I don't know that it factors in. far be it for me to say I believe, other than to say that the city has historically preserved a delta, as the council member alluded to. Before there was a minimum wage in the city of Los Angeles, there was a preserved delta between the living wage and the minimum wage. That discussion, I don't believe, ever took place with respect to eliminating the delta, because there are some other issues that come along with, or characteristics that come with living wage. Case in point, one would be time off, compensated time off, that the minimum wage does not carry with it. So there are other areas that the living wage has that the city has said they want to for, again, a living wage. And it's not at all to take away from the excellent work that was done to establish the minimum wage, but I never heard the discussion saying that that would take the place of the living wage.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different animal, right? The citywide minimum wage ordinance is a different animal than the hotel.
The city has said, from a proprietary standpoint, that it believes that it wants to have a living wage for those areas where there are contracts, there are leases, licenses involved doing business with the city to establish the living wage. Now, if the desire is, and the motion somewhat speaks to that, if the desire is to say that there will just be one wage, we're just simply attempting to follow the motion as it relates to the way it was put forward, and attempting to preserve the delta that has historically been in place. I don't know that we took into account collective bargaining agreements as much as we took into account throughout the state. When we went back, we being the Bureau of Contract Administration, and looked at what was taking place along California as it relates to the living wage, we saw that there were several cities that had far outpaced our living wage as it relates to the combination of health care allowance and the base rate for the workers. And that's one of the things that went into the recommendation that we made as it relates to increasing what happens at LAWA, given the environment and the type of work that took place there. And I would imagine that the motion somewhat speaks to that in attempting to preserve a delta, given what many of the airports and that type of work environment have throughout the state of California, specifically the big cities such as San Francisco and Oakland, San Jose.
I mean, I'm trying to also figure out how we reconcile the two. And thank you.
Councilman Harris Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Mr. Krikorian for drilling down on this issue, because it is very, very confusing and a little bit troubling that we have two human beings doing the exact same work and they're paid different amounts. I think one of the ways that you may understand us arriving at that is we're in a situation where wages overall have lagged, and so you take these sometimes illogical steps to correct that, but you don't ever fully correct it. I mean, we have a situation right now in this city where to be a parking attendant in this building, you get a different wage if you're a parking attendant in the building up the hill that we also own. And you're taking tickets for people to park their cars. We negotiate a variety of different wages for the same work for different bargaining units within the city, and we do it as a matter of policy. And again, an ideal world is one where everybody makes, all human beings make the same pay for the same amount of work. The most troubling part of this to me that we haven't discussed is the calculation of the delta. So I keep hearing that it's just $2, and like, is it $2 no matter how high it goes? Is it a percent? Is it a formula? Is it, like, how do we arrive at $2 as the delta?
That is the recommendation of the motion.
But how do you arrive at the recommendation, I guess, is the question.
The motion was introduced in council, and the motion is coming directly to committee to be
so you
acted
didn't pick
upon.
It up.
Right.
So you don't know of any rationale for $2 as opposed to $2.15, or to say that it should be minimum wage plus 1.2%. I'm just,
Yeah.
somebody say something, please.
Oh.
Well, while you're mulling over that, let me invite Jim. Jim, why don't you come to the table? You've been active in these discussions from the labor perspective. Don't leave. I don't want anybody to leave. I just want to add to. Yeah. Jim, can you give us a little insight?
Sure. Good afternoon, council members. James Elmendorf from Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. So just to, I think, speak to a couple of questions. I came here to speak principally on item number 3, which is the motion brought forward to address the airport issue, and not on item number 2. But just to suggest, one of the thoughts around the airport historically being in a different situation than both the city's living wage for its city contractors as well as, frankly, the rest of the city is that the airport is a unique market, that it is itself its own market, whereby the companies that do business at the airport have a captive audience. They make a much greater level of revenue and benefit from billions and billions of dollars of investment done by the city to make that possible. And so the city, as a matter of policy, and this goes back historically that Lane's been involved with for many years, has chosen to have a living wage policy, not merely to say, how do we get the highest wage for a certain group of people that we think is politically possible, but also how do we ensure that we have a higher standard at this place where we, the city, are investing a huge amount of our resources to allow for business to take place. And that is what the original rationale was for the living wage as a whole, and what a greater rationale was for at the airport, and why there was historically a higher living wage at the airport than there was in the rest of the city, and why the living wage existed as compared to the rest of the minimum wage. I believe, to your question, Councilmember Harris Dawson, the thought that I have heard articulated from a number of people and that I would agree with about the $2 delta is that's the historical rate whereby the airport living wage has been higher than the minimum wage. Looking back over the past 2 decades since the living wage was adopted in 1997, it's traditionally been somewhere between $1.90 to $2.10 higher, probably slightly different in some years depending on what the CPI was in each year, but traditionally on average about $2 higher than what the minimum wage was. And so the motion that's put before preserves what that historical delta has been, and does so for the purpose both of maximizing the wages for workers at the airports that we always want to do, but also does so to provide benefit to those workers at a place where the city is putting in such a huge investment. And we've seen that in recent years as the city has been expanding and renovating the airport to make it a better place to live and work.
If I could, Councilman.
So, if I, just to try to follow up on that, John. So, at the time the airport, and this was before any of our time, but I know you were there. So, before when the living wage ordinance for the airport was enacted, you're saying that since that time until now, the traditional delta has been around $2 above the minimum wage.
Correct.
But at that time, we had a reliance on a grossly substandard state minimum wage. It's a very different situation than we are in now in the city, when the city is leading the entire state because of the work that we did last year in substantially increasing our minimum wage. So to use the historical delta that began at a time when we had an entirely different base point seems to me not to be, I mean, if we were to compare it to something, maybe comparing it with the citywide living wage ordinance might be a more appropriate benchmark, because that has been in place since then. We could see the historical trend, whatever increase there's been. Okay, if there's a delta with the airport, for the reasons that you said, if that's important from a policy perspective, that seems to me the better baseline. But what we're doing instead today with these 2 items, it seems to me, and again, maybe I'm just not hearing this, understanding it right, but we're saying that all of the city contractor employees are now going to settle for the minimum wage, every one of them, even though that was enacted in similar circumstances in order to increase wages of those who are benefiting from city contracts. So for them, we're saying from now on, you're going to get the minimum wage, it's going to be equalized. But for the city living wage, for the airport living wage ordinance folks, we're going to say, but you are going to maintain your delta. All the other living wage ordinance recipients are not. So that's, if we're talking about historical deltas, then we should be increasing the living wage ordinance for the entire city, but that's not before us. So the disparity issue becomes even greater to me in light of that. And then if I can I do want to hear your thoughts. The second point is, you talked about the unique nature of the airport as a city's asset, as a justification to, have it. That was true when we enacted the original airport living wage ordinance. And at that time, when it was applied to airport hotels, the idea was those hotels are benefiting from their proximity to the airport. Mm-hmm. And then, more recently, the argument was made, well, in fact, every hotel is benefiting from the city's investments in tourism and all the other things, and so therefore we should have a separate hotel minimum wage because of the nexus with the city's investments. So that very argument about the airport has now been applied much more broadly than the airport to everyone else because of this. And I still struggle with the idea of why isn't that true of any business? I mean, any business that does business in Los Angeles benefits from the police department, from the fire department, from the streets that their stuff gets delivered on. In everything else, the city is making an enormous investment that benefits businesses. So if that's going to be the argument, then why don't we have a nexus with any business?
So just to speak to your point around the first issue, I think the city does have a policy choice. Obviously, these two items came up separately, one with a report that's been done by city staff and a second with a motion by council members. And so there's a perfectly reasonable argument to say, okay, we should have these two things in alignment. As I said, I came to comment on item number 3.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot.
All right.
No, that's okay. And to urge
knowledgeable.
To urge that the city do take a step to preserve that delta at the airport. I think it would be perfectly appropriate for the council to say, if we are going to do that at the airport, we also do that for city contractors, and that would be an appropriate step to keep those two things in alignment. I merely wanted to respond to the question about what was the rationale for the historical delta currently, and it is the historical rate. And I think if you wanted to keep the living wage in alignment with the airport wage, keeping them both at $2 above, the city minimum wage would be appropriate, and would recognize the city's responsibility to pay its contractors and pay airport contractors a little better as a result of their work on government business and where the greater responsibility is for doing the public's work.
Well, looking at item 3, based on the discussion, if the LAWA living wage is $2 higher than the minimum wage, doesn't it make sense to have the non-LAWA living wage higher than the minimum wage?
Yeah, but if we're going to do that, I would rather not do that off the top of, off the cuff.
Your answer to that is yes.
That's what we have to reconcile. We have to reconcile if we're willing to accept a different standard.
Yeah.
For these.
Well, I actually have a question, some questions about the airport stuff, because I have the distinction, I think, at this table. I wasn't here for any of it. The minimum wage, the living wage, the airport wage, the hotel wage, none of it. I was on your side of the table. But the airport, so a couple questions I had about that. Does that apply to all the LAWA airports or just LAX? And then 2, what's it seems to me that the particularity that the airport has is that it's a monopoly, right? If you want to fly into Los Angeles, you have a couple of choices, Santa Monica and LAX and Burbank, and I think 2 of those are ours. So businesses are not competing with each other in the same way that business writ large at, and so they gain more benefits. You could make the argument that the workers should benefit from that as well as the owners of these various contracts. But can you say more about the particularity of the airport?
Just the airports under the airport jurisdiction, under LAWA's jurisdiction.
So those are, help us.
That would be Van Nuys, that would be LAWA, what at one time was Ontario, not any longer, but we still have some residual that we're dealing with respect to living wage. But when Ontario was under LAWA's authority, then the living wage also applied.
So when we did the deal with Ontario, we said that the labor agreements would carry on for several years.
Right.
Would this be included in that?
That's a good question. I
don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe so. No, I don't. I mean, I now I'm looking at my city attorneys and saying.
Yeah.
I really don't know the details about the contract between the Ontario Airport and LAX, but to the extent that the Ontario Airport is no longer within the jurisdiction to have to abide by the Los Angeles Administrative Code, then it would not apply to Ontario.
Okay, well, before we take any action, I'm going to ask Marquise Bridges to come up. He had a comment on item 3. I think this is the only card left. Pardon? Did someone submit cards and they weren't called yet? Okay. Why don't you come over here and tell me who you are, and then. Okay, Mr. Bridges.
Thank you, Councilman. I wanted to just add a little context to the conversation. I think it's important, to answer Councilman Krikorian's concern and Councilman Harris-Dawson's concern, specifically about the Delta is how we're speaking to it.
Please, let's go.
I just want to put into context the difference in the work and the environment that the airport entails, and an airport worker to go through is a little bit different. Not necessarily because it's a more elevated industry. An airport worker is, at some points in the last few years, been a frontline responder to an emergency. There's a context to the work that they do that entails a lot of security work. It's something that's added to the work that they do. And so the context of creating a delta, a $2 differential, specifically relates to retainment. You don't want folks that are using the airport as a revolving door job. You want folks that are invested in being at the airport, and so having a differential really relates to security at the airport, because you want folks to have an investment in the security of people coming into the airport. I think in a few years we have the Olympics coming to the airport, and it's a place where you want folks to
Thank you.
have the best environment.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I do have some cards here. Rafael Leon, Sandra Martinez, Margarita Hernandez, Luz Laguna, and Ana Espandola. You can just identify yourself, and you may begin. You got 1 minute.
Buenas tardes, señores concejales de Los Ángeles. Me llamo Margarita Hernández y trabajo para SkyChef en la ciudad de Los Ángeles. Tengo 20 años trabajando para esta compañía. Yo lavo los platos y equipo para diferentes aerolíneas que vuelan en Los Ángeles. Yo, con 20 años de trabajo en el aeropuerto, solamente gano 11.85. Me siento muy frustrada porque mi bajo salario no me da lo suficiente para pagar mis gastos, especialmente mis gastos médicos. Yo no puedo pagar una buena aseguranza con este salario, y yo padezco de una condición médica que necesito medicina. Mis medicamentos son bien caros y a veces me quedo corta para pagar mi renta y medicamentos. Tengo que decidir entre pagar mi medicina o comer.
Thank you for your comments.
Gracias.
Thank
I'm going
you.
to translate for her.
Okay.
Good afternoon, City Council members. My name is Margarita, and I work for SkyChef in the city of Los Angeles. I've been working there for 20 years in the dish room, and I only make $11.85 an hour. I feel very frustrated because sometimes I gotta make a decision to either buy my medicines or buy my food because I have a very bad medical condition and I cannot afford a good health care.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Identify yourself, please.
Buenas tardes, miembros del Concilio de Los Ángeles. Mi nombre es Sandra Martínez y trabajo para Sky Chefs en el área del aeropuerto. Tengo un año trabajando para la compañía preparando comida para varias aerolíneas. Y yo gano $10.70 y es muy frustrante este trabajo, este bajo salario. Yo, en nombre de mis compañeros, quiero agradecer a los miembros de esta comisión y del concilio por apoyarnos en nuestra causa de ganar el sueldo digno del aeropuerto. Gracias.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council. My name is Sandra Martinez and I work for Sky Chef at the airport area. I've been working there for a year for this company, prepping the food that goes into various airlines. I only make $10.70. And living with this low wage is very frustrating. And on behalf of my coworkers, I want to thank you to all the members of this commission and the City Council for supporting us in our cause, because it's going to help up to more than 3,000 workers that work in this industry. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, members of the Council, of the City Council. My name is Rafael Leon, and I work for Flying Foods in LA, in the LAX area. I've been working for this company for 4 years as a cook. My coworkers and I prepare the meals that goes to many international airlines that departures from LAX. My coworkers and I have been fighting for the living wage for many years. And this law is going to help us to achieve the standards of the airport. We want to thank you, the members of the Commission and the City Council members that are supporting us in our cause. You are going to help more than 3,000 families that has been waiting for this many years. Thank you for your support in our cause, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments and for your presence this afternoon. We're going to... Please identify yourself.
My name is Anna Espandola. I work at Tom Bradley. Our job is different because we deal with communicable diseases. People come in sick, we deal with body fluid, something that someone else might not deal with. So for us, it's important to get that raised. Like I said, if we deal with diseases, I take home to my kids, and so on. It spreads. So it is a lot harder for us to work there. When the TSA shooting a few years ago, we were there. So it is a dangerous job. It might not seem like it. We make sure the travelers are safe. We make sure that they get to where they need to go safely. Whether it's assisting them with disabilities or cleaning the planes, doing the janitorial jobs in the restrooms. It's important and it's very delicate. Like I said, there's a lot of communicable diseases out there, and being that there's such a big amount of passengers on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Luz Laguna. I've been working in the airport for 7 years. Just like my coworker here mentioned to you guys, our job is a high risk, not just because of the diseases that we go through, but this is a daily basis that at the time that you guys are sitting down right here, there's an incident happening or an accident going on at the airport at this time. You guys have heard in the news that a lot of colleagues, from the airport have lost their lives, due to what's it called, the unsafety, of the airport. We risk our lives daily. We go into work, but we don't know if we're going to go back to our families. I was there the day of the shooting when this happened 2 years ago. We were locked down for almost 12 hours. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, if I was, if another incident was going to happen. Emergency response is very important to us because that was, the only training that we had, for us to be able to help in our airport at this time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you both. Okay, members, without objection, I'm going to recommend that we note and file this report, and that we've got a recommendation by the CLA is going to be read Into the record?
Yes, the recommendation will be to request the city attorney, with the assistance of the Bureau of Contract Administration and the Chief Legislative Analyst, to prepare and present a draft ordinance that will update living wage rates and benefits policies in the city of Los Angeles as follows. Revise the living wage ordinance, non-airport living wage, to increase the non-LAWA wage rate at equal annual increments until such rates are an amount $1 above the city of Los Angeles minimum wage on July 1st, 2021. Effective July 1st, 2018, include annual health increases and match the annual health increases for non-LAWA living wage to the percentage increase of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, medical care services, and amend the Los Angeles Municipal Code, Section 10.37.12, to add that when any collective bargaining agreement expires or is open for negotiation of compensation terms, the CBA may only expressly supersede the requirements of the living wage ordinance when an employee is paid a wage not less than the applicable living wage rate.
All right, that's a mouthful that merely says we got some more work to do. And we will be getting additional input from you and others as we try to craft a policy that truly makes sense and is fair. And so there are no objections. That's going to be the order.
Well,
Mr. Chair, does that pertain to item number 2?
Item 2.
Okay.
For item 3, we are going to receive and file.
Receive and file?
Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to approve the motion for.
Approve the motion on number 3.
Without objection, we'll be approving the motion
No,
for item 3.
there is an objection. I'm sorry, I'm not ready to vote on this. And I still have questions for staff. We were just given a recommendation for writing an ordinance to increase the living wage ordinance without one bit of analysis, without it being in front of me. I am not prepared to impose additional costs on every single contractor that does business with the city of Los Angeles without having this be analyzed or be in front of me. And we're instructing an ordinance to be drafted. So I do object to it, and this is, I haven't even seen this recommendation until it was just read right now. And it's going to affect every single business that does business with the city of Los Angeles. So no, I do object. And I even on the airport, I have further questions that I would like to have answered. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, I think can be answered. I just haven't had the answer yet. So if I could have staff come up maybe and respond to those questions, maybe I would be able to get there.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, just for the record, I agree with Mr. Krikorian's concern. I mean, I think it needs further analysis. I don't think anyone is opposed to working toward the objectives that were discussed at this table, but I think we definitely need more analysis and more discussion.
Why don't we just ask for a report back? That way we can.
That would be terrific.
That way we can explore all the issues, the concerns that have been raised, at least on the dais, and address any concerns that have been made.
I think this conversation brought up even more questions for me than have been answered so far as well.
So if I could clarify then,
Yes.
The recommendation that I just heard was for staff to report back on the recommendation that was just read into the record on the impacts analysis.
Correct.
Et cetera, for item 2. And I'm sorry I had not heard the recommendation for item 3 as well, since they were both called at the same time.
On number 3, it was to approve the recommendations, but on that, I actually still had a question or two.
So we're going to report back on both items.
Well, no, I think that they need to have something done in a timely fashion because it's going to be expiring and there's a federal law discrepancy that comes into play, and that's the part that I still don't understand. So maybe if staff or Mr. Elmendorf can respond to that. The discrepancy with federal law is where I think we need to get where we need to get to with this, but and I still don't understand that at all. So if we can better understand why the federal law specifically impacts this living wage ordinance, that part I still don't understand.
Sure.
And yeah, so if you could please respond to that.
Sure.
And then also, who are the employees that this living wage ordinance applies to? Are they airport contractors only, or does it apply to the airport hotels and other hotels as well?
So just to distinguish, yes, so for item number 2, the recommendation is separate. For item number 3, which refers to the airport, so we estimate that there are roughly 10,000 employees who are affected by the various elements of the ordinance. Those break into roughly 3 categories: the concessions workers, food and beverage, retail workers, the workers who do a variety of forms of work, from janitorial and cabin cleaners and other forms of, some of whom spoke here today, and then the airline catering workers. And I believe the issue that you're raising relates most particularly to the airline catering workers, who are the folks, some of whom spoke today, who prepare the food that goes on the airlines, so that people actually get when they fly on a plane. And those are the workers who are, where the living wage applies, but who are currently not receiving, many of them, the living wage. And so, as you heard, some of them describe making $10.70, though the minimum wage, living wage requirement at the airport is much, much higher. And so part of what's before you in the motion, as we were discussing earlier, is to raise the overall living wage, but part of what's before you as well is to adjust the collective bargaining opt-out in a way that ensures, first, that no airport worker will make less than the wage standard, and then second, that particularly for those airline catering workers, many of whom are making less than the overall wage and do not have health care or other benefits, that the city would only accept such a collective bargaining agreement supersession if they were actually receiving, through a combination of wages and benefits, the wage they're supposed to get. And so the purpose, from my understanding of any of these proposals related to collective bargaining, is always to ensure that workers have the ability to negotiate what they want, but with the goal of ensuring that they actually get the wage or benefit and never letting people fall below. And what's unfortunately happened for airline catering workers is too many have fallen below. It relates, as you suggested, to issues related to complicated federal law, the Railway Labor Act, which is an unusual law. And so what you would be doing today is ensuring that all these workers here, there's roughly 3,000 of them, will actually be getting the wage the city has mandated for so many years. I see a question.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like you're avoiding explaining this, but I have to ask.
Please.
How is it that some workers don't get the wage?
So I am not trying to avoid explaining it. So the Railway Labor Act establishes a different standard than what is the normal standard for collective bargaining, which is the National Labor Relations Act. What it has done is essentially allow companies to create permanent contracts that never expire. And so the result is that in the wake of 9/11, when the initial collective bargaining supersession agreements were given, the industry was expected to disappear, frankly. They were given to allow the company to go a little bit below what was at then roughly a $10 or $11 living wage, slightly above the minimum wage, a couple bucks, has turned into a dramatic gap because those contracts never expire. The companies have no incentive to get rid of those agreements. And so there is no capacity for workers to be able to negotiate a fair wage because they continue to roll over and roll over. And so workers who were making $10.70 at that point, which was very close to what the living wage rate, remain making $10.70 many years later.
Because the airport living wage ordinance included a carve-out for collective bargaining agreements. And at that time, with these under the federal law of these specific collective bargaining agreements, if there's no successor agreement negotiated, they continue in effect. Mm-hmm. So the employer just says, I've got to carve out from the ordinance. There's no reason for me to even negotiate. I'll just continue to stick with what we've had for the last 10 years.
Correct.
And so it just continues in effect. So it was an unintended consequence, I'm sure, of the collective bargaining carve-out. The assumption would be that employers would continue to negotiate with labor to try to reach collectively bargained agreements, but they don't have to under this federal law, which allows the old expired agreement to continue.
That's
right?
exactly right. And in every other circumstance where there are collective bargaining supersession clauses, workers do make, through a combination of wages and benefits, dramatically more than whatever the living wage requirement is, and it merely allows for the negotiation of particular health care benefits or pensions or whatever that reflect what the workers think is most important. But in this case, it has allowed companies to pay workers dramatically less overall than what the city has intended. And so this would close that loophole. And I thank you, Councilmember, for bringing this to the.
So the 10,000 employees that this would apply to, more or less, are employees of contractors who contract with the airport.
No, so the 10,000 employees that the overall proposal would apply to are employees both of the contractors at the airport as well as contractors of the airlines. And generally speaking, the worst paid employees, both the janitorial workers as well as the airline catering workers, are contractors of the airlines rather than the airport. And one of the reasons that the standard is so difficult to address and must be addressed through a matter of policy rather than merely negotiations is not only the issue that we've raised earlier, but because they are competitive, their airline companies play off all of these companies against each other. And so that if you do not raise them all at once, you will see that the lowest paying company will get all the business.
But the expansion of the airport living wage ordinance to encompass airport hotels is not a part of this. This is only for contractors.
Correct. This is only for people at the airport. Does not affect hotel workers in any way.
So Mr. Chair, if I understand that.
Right. Mr. Dawson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. If I understand our discussion correctly, we're doing something today that is narrow enough to take care of this particular set of workers that are impacted by this federal policy, and the rest we are asking for a report back on, and issues like rationale and all that kind of thing will come back to this committee.
That's correct.
Got it.
So could I clarify? So item 3 then would be to request the city attorney to prepare an ordinance on that carve-out regarding the collective bargaining agreements, and then request.
Are you okay with that carve-out
on the remaining
Mr.
issues?
Krikorian, are you okay with 3?
What's that?
Are you okay with the carve-out on 3 now?
The recommendations of number 3, now that I understand that specifically what it's targeted to, I'm fine.
For the full ordinance.
All right, we have Christmas in June here today.
You're rad, council member.
Specific to airline employees.
Right.
Specific to airline employees.
So 3 is narrowed specifically to airline.
If I may suggest that three.
Please, let's come to order. Order, please.
3 distinguished from 2 is a request merely for the city attorney to draft, and so bringing forward all of 3 with the city attorney to draft would allow the council to be able to evaluate the merits of that, and then at the same time bring back the staff report on both issues and could address the policy questions, but not necessarily separate out the issues for 3.
Except what I think the chair had said on number 2 is to get the report back before we draft the statute, because what happens in this council is when draft ordinances are prepared, they never end up changing. And so we draft an ordinance and we say, oh, well, we'll be able to consider the ordinance later, but we never make one comma of change in those ordinances. So ordinances, in my view, should always come after reports. And I think that's what was the recommendation that was proposed. If I'm not
All right. So I think that's clearer. So we'll get report backs on items 2 and 3, and then we will give some instructions on drafting the ordinance.
Okay.
Is that it, members? Is that basically where we're landing? All right, thank you. That will be the order. Thank you for your attendance and your participation. This meeting is adjourned.